dazu diese Nüsschen. Ganz genau. So, jetzt geht's los.
Can I ask you, I don't know if you know who Michael Malice is, but in terms of constructing systems of incentives, it's interesting to ask. I don't think I've talked to you about this before. Malice.
Übrigens, Michael Malice ist einer von diesen Boys, die immer bei Lex Fridman rumhängen und behaupten von sich, sie sind Anarchisten. Sie meinen damit aber österreichische Schule, Anarchokapitalismus. Das hat natürlich nichts mit Anarchismus zu tun, ne? Und Lex Fridman checkt das immer nicht.
Espouses anarchism. So he sees all government as fundamentally getting in the way or even being destructive.
Ich blende den Chat nur bei Joscha Bach ein. Oder wenn ich Mathe-Sachen hier vorrechne. Ich weiß nicht genau, das habe ich mir mal überlegt, dass das bei Joscha Bach vielleicht angemessen ist.
To collaborations between human beings thriving. What do you think? What's the role of government in a society that thrives? Is anarchism at all compelling to you as a system? So like not just small government, but no government at all.
Yeah, I don't see how this would work. The government is an agent that imposes an offset on your reward function, on your payout metrics, so your behavior becomes compatible with the common good.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument there is that you can have collectives, like governing organizations, but not government, like where you're born on a particular set of land, and therefore you must follow this rule, or else you're forced by what they call violence, because there's an implied violence here. So what government, the key aspect of government is it protects you from the rest of the world with an army and with police, right? So there's this, it has a monopoly on violence. It's the only one that's able to do violence.
So there are many forms of government. Not all governments do that, right? But we find that in successful countries, the government has a monopoly on violence, and that means that you cannot get ahead by starting your own army, because the government will come down on you and destroy you if you try to do that. And in countries where you can build your own army and get away with it, some people will do it, right? And these countries is what we call failed countries in a way. And if you don't want to have violence, the point is not to appeal to the moral intentions of people, because some people will use strategies, if they get ahead with them, that fill a particular kind of ecological niche. So you need to destroy that.
Ich wäre extrem interessiert daran, was Joscha Bach zu meinem Buch sagt. Ich muss seine Adresse rausfinden und ihm eins schicken. Ich habe ihm ja schon mal einen Liebesbrief geschickt, ne? Und den habe ich ihm gegeben, als ich ihn in Berlin getroffen habe. Das heißt, den hat er garantiert auch gelesen, weil er ja... Nein, er wird es nicht zerreißen. Das glaube ich nicht.
Ecological niche. And if effective government has a monopoly on violence, it can create a world where nobody is able to use violence and get ahead. Right? So you want to use that monopoly on violence not to exert violence, but to make violence impossible, to raise the cost of violence. So people need to get ahead with non-violent means.
So the idea is that you might be able to achieve that in an anarchist state with companies. So with
Und für echte Anarchisten ist Ausbeutung aber auch Gewalt. Das ist das Problem.
The forces of capitalism is create security companies where the one that's most ethically sound rises to the top. Basically, it would be a much better representative of the people, because there is less sort of stickiness to the big.
So ein Schwachsinn, ne? Offensichtlich haben Marketingaspekte und Marktaspekte und profitgetriebene Aspekte nichts mit ethically sound zu tun, sodass sich da auch nicht die ethisch sinnvollste Armee durchsetzen würde in diesem Wettbewerb. So ein Schwachsinn. Michael Malice, echt. Ist einfach nur
military
berühmt geworden, weil er
force
ein Troll
sticking
ist.
around, even though it's long outlived
So you
its
have
usefulness.
groups of militants that are hopefully efficiently organized, because otherwise they're going to lose against the other groups of militants, and they are coordinating themselves with the rest of society until they are having a monopoly on violence. How is that different from a government?
I'm trying to
So
play
it's
devil's
basically
advocate.
converging to the same thing,
So
right?
I think
Genau.
it always, that's what I was trying to argue with Malice. I feel like it always converges towards government at scale. But I think the idea is you can have a lot of collectives that are, you basically never let anything scale too big. So one of the problems with governments is it gets too big in terms of like the size of the group over which it has
Es geht in
control.
meinem Buch um alles.
My sense.
Das Buch heißt Das gesellschaftliche Problem. Kurz zusammengefasst, das gesellschaftliche Problem lautet: Das Wohl für alle maximieren, unter den Nebenbedingungen Gewalt zu minimieren. Und es geht im Wesentlichen um Machthierarchien, Gewalt, Datenverarbeitung und Evolutionsdruck und Bewusstsein. Und damit konstruiere ich bzw. dekonstruiere ich die ganzen Narrative und mache dann im letzten Kapitel so einen kleinen Ausblick für den Anarchismus und so.
Says that would happen anyway. In this, so a successful company like Amazon or Facebook, I mean, it starts forming a monopoly over entire populations, not over just hundreds of millions, but billions of people. So I don't know.
Wichtig hierbei zu erwähnen ist, dass ich vollständig darauf verzichte, die böse Absicht von einzelnen Leuten zu benötigen, um unsere beobachtbaren Phänomene und Erscheinungen zu beschreiben und zu erklären. Ich komme ohne böse Absicht aus.
But there is something about the abuses of power the government can have when it has a monopoly on violence, right? And so that's a tension there. But
so the question is, how can you set the incentives for government correctly?
Yes.
And this mostly applies at the highest levels of government. And because we haven't found a way to set them correctly, we made the highest levels of government relatively weak. And this is, I think, part of the reason why we had difficulty to coordinate the pandemic response. And China didn't have that much difficulty. And there is, of course, a much higher risk of the abuse of power that exists in China because the power is largely unchecked.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what happens in the next generation, for instance. Imagine that we would agree that the current government of China is largely correct and benevolent, and maybe we don't agree on this. But if we did, how can we make sure that this stays like this? And if you don't have checks and balances, division of power, it's hard to achieve. We don't have a solution for that problem. But the abolishment of government basically would remove the control structure. From a cybernetic perspective, there is an optimal point in the system where the regulation should be happening, right? Where you can measure the current incentives and the regulator would be properly incentivized to make the right decisions and change the payout metrics of everything below it in such a way that the local prisoner's dilemmas get resolved. Right? You cannot resolve the prisoner's dilemma without some kind of eternal control that emulates an infinite game in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which it seems like the reason government, the parts of government that don't work well currently, is because there's not good mechanisms through which to interact for the citizen.
Im Buch argumentiere ich übrigens, dass zentralisierte Kontrolle dieses kombinatorische Problem nicht lösen kann, ne? Das ist ja vergleichbar mit einem Traveling Salesman Problem oder so, ne? Zu viele Nebenbedingungen, zu viele Konflikte, die auftreten durch die lokalen Zielfunktionen, die alle optimiert werden wollen und so. Und ja, dieses Argument, was ich sonst immer mit dem Anarchismus bringe, dass der Anarchismus das lokale, das numerische Integrieren der physikalischen Gesetze ist und so. Ja, also sozusagen numerisches Lösen von ekligen Differentialgleichungen.
Citizenry to interact with government is basically it hasn't caught up in terms of technology, and I think once you integrate some of the
Achso, Schröck, das ist eine schöne Frage, ne? Ob die in Hadza in Tansania auch mit dem Gefangenendilemma überhaupt Probleme haben. Nein, haben sie wahrscheinlich nicht. Und im Buch arbeite ich richtig gut raus, dass das Gefangenendilemma ja erst aufgespannt wird durch Machthierarchien. Das existiert ja vorher gar nicht. Ne? Diese ganze Sache mit dem Offset in der Payout-Matrix entsteht ja im klassischen Gefangenendilemma erst durch den Sheriff, der dich gegen deinen Kollegen, der mit dir zusammen im Knast sitzt, in dieses Gefangenendilemma reinsetzt. Der ist der Bestimmer. Der erzeugt das erst.
Revolution of being able to have
Also
a
es
lot of
kommen
access
keine
to data, be
es
able
kommen
to
nur
vote
ein
on
paar Formeln
different
vor in
ideas
extra Boxen,
at
die
a
man nicht
local
lesen
level,
muss,
at all
falls das deine
levels,
Frage ist.
at the optimal
Das ist ein
level,
reines
like you're
Prosabuch.
saying, that can resolve the prisoner dilemmas, and to integrate AI to help you out automate things that are like
Ich glaube, es gibt nur zwei
that don't
Formeln und die
require
sind
the
sowas wie
human
f von x
ingenuity.
ist gleich y und y ist gleich
I
f
feel
von
like
x oder so.
that's where government could operate that well and can also
Es gibt keine Formeln
break
in dem Buch.
apart the inefficient bureaucracies if needed. There'll be a strong incentive to be efficient.
Und übrigens hier diese Sache, ne? Also diese klassische Kritik an den Bürokratien und so, die habe ich ja auch gefressen. Aber ich mache in dem Buch sozusagen auch noch ein paar mehr Annahmen oder auch andere Beschreibungen, die noch ein bisschen über Peter-Prinzip und Parkinson'sche Gesetze hinausgehen. Die mir erst während des Schreibens sozusagen bewusst geworden sind. Das ist schon ganz cool. Also es bringt richtig was. Y ist f hoch minus 1 von x sozusagen. Das ist die andere Gleichung. Aber das ist ein Symbol, ne? Also da geht es nur um Symbolik eigentlich. Um den Punkt klar zu machen.
Successful.
Throughout human history, we see an evolution and evolutionary competition of modes of government and of individual governments is in these modes. And every nation state, in some sense, is some kind of organism that has found different solutions for the problem of government. And you could look at all these different models and the different scales at which it exists as empirical attempts to validate the idea of how to build a better government.
Ja.
And I
Genau.
suspect that
Das ist
the
einmal
idea
Trial
of
Error.
anarchism, similar to the idea of communism, is the result of being disenchanted with the ugliness of the real existing solutions and the attempt to get to an utopia. And I suspect that communism originally was not a utopia. I think that in the same way as original Christianity, it had a particular kind of vision. And this vision is a society, a mode of organization within that society in which humans can coexist at scale without coercion. In the same way as we do in a healthy family, right? In a good family, you don't terrorize each other into compliance, but you understand what everybody needs and what everybody is able to contribute and what the intended future of the whole thing is. And everybody coordinates their behavior in the right way and informs each other about how to do this, and all the interactions that happen are instrumental to making that happen, right? Could this happen at scale? And I think this is the idea of communism. Communism is opposed to the idea that we need economic terror or other forms of terror to make that happen. But in practice, what happened is that the proto-communist countries, the real existing socialism, replaced a part of the economic terror with moral terror. Right,
Genau.
so we were told to do the right thing for moral reasons, and of course it didn't really work, and the economy eventually collapsed. And the moral terror had actual real cost. Right? People were in prison because they were morally non-compliant. And that is the other thing is that the idea of communism became a utopia. So it basically was projected into the afterlife. We were told in my childhood that communism was a hypothetical society to which we were in a permanent revolution that justified everything that was presently wrong with society morally. But it was something that our grandchildren probably would not ever see because it was too ideal and too far in the future to make it happen right now. And people were just not there yet morally. And the same thing happened with Christianity, right? This notion of heaven was mythologized and projected into an afterlife. And I think this was just their idea of.
Das ist eine interessante Parallele, ne? Weil das ist ja tatsächlich genau, das ist passiert in der DDR, ne? Allen wurde gesagt, es gibt ja diese Scheiße mit dem Kapitalismus, wir wollen zum Kommunismus, wir haben jetzt irgend so ein Zwischending, aber wir arbeiten alle zusammen an dieser Trajektorie, wir wollen dahin, ne? Das war die Geschichte, die erzählt wurde. Und es war ja auch klar, dass es nicht sofort erreicht wird, ne? Das heißt, das ist schon so eine Projektion ins Afterlife rein eigentlich, ja? Interessant.
God's kingdom, of this world in which we instantiate the next level transcendental agent in the perfect form. So everything goes smoothly and without violence and without conflict and without this human messiness on this economic messiness and the terror and coercion that existed in the present societies. And the idea of whether humans can exist at scale in a harmonious way, non-coercively, is untested. Right? Or a lot of people tested it but didn't get it to work so far. And the utopia is a world in where you get.
Die Scale ist tatsächlich wichtig, ne, für das Measure an Coercion. Also Coercion heißt ja Zwang. Und dieses kombinatorische Problem sozusagen, das Wohl für alle zu maximieren und Gewalt dabei zu minimieren, das skaliert nicht. Das kann man lokal probieren, aber die empirischen Belege und auch andere Theoretiker sagen so ein Cap bei allerhöchstens 150 vor und die normale empirische Sachlage sagt, dass ein Plenum ab 100 Leuten bescheuert wird. Also eine Kommune darf nicht wirklich größer als 100 Leute werden. Was aber kein Problem ist, ne? Weil dann hat man halt Wohnbereiche, die einfach zusammen sozusagen ein Plenum von 100 Leuten bilden. Und wenn es höhere Organisationsstrukturen geben soll, senden die halt Abgesandte quasi, die demokratisch bestimmt werden und die wiederum in einer Kaskade von 100 existieren dürfen nur. Damit sozusagen diese soziokulturellen Aspekte dabei nicht verloren gehen, weil wir relativ gut mit dieser Skala umgehen können. Alles, was deutlich über diese Zahl drüber geht, macht uns bescheuert und führt zu Entfremdung, weil wir uns nicht auf so viele Menschen einlassen können. Du hast eine Hierarchie, richtig, aber das anarchistische Grundprinzip ist ja, dass sich die Machthierarchien, wenn es welche gibt, vor der Mehrheit rechtfertigen müssen. Es gibt einen Rechtfertigungszwang. Der enforced Transparenz quasi. Heutzutage ist es so, dass die Machthierarchien ihre Macht nutzen, um genau diesen Hebel auszuhebeln permanent. Deswegen gibt es ja auch sozusagen kein unternehmerisches Risiko in dem Sinne oder irgendwelche Leute, die wie Olaf Scholz eigentlich irgendwie übelst viel Dreck am Stecken haben und trotzdem damit rumkommen. Du musst ja mal drauf schaffen. Bei uns ist sozusagen, je mächtiger du bist, also je reicher, das übersetzt sich ja fast 1:1, das ist quasi eine Korrelation, die 1:1 ist, desto weniger wirst du zur Rechenschaft gezogen für das, was du tust. Und je ärmer du bist, desto mehr wirst du zur Rechenschaft gezogen. Deswegen heißt es Kapitalismus auch, ne?
Get all the good things without any of the bad things. And you are, I think, very susceptible to believe in utopias when you are very young and don't understand that everything has to happen in causal patterns, that there is always feedback loops that ultimately are closed.
Guck dir einfach meine Videos
an. There's nothing that just happens because it's good or bad. Good or bad don't exist in isolation. They only exist with respect to larger systems.
So, can you intuit why?
Susceptible to believe in utopias when you are very young and don't understand that everything has to happen in causal patterns, that there is always feedback loops that ultimately are closed. There's nothing that just happens because it's good or bad. Good or bad don't exist in isolation. They only exist with respect to larger systems.
So,
ja. Good und Bad emergieren sozusagen in einem Kontext. Der muss erst entstehen. Klar.
Can you intuit why utopias fail as systems? So, like having a utopia that's out there beyond the horizon, is it because then? So it's not only because it's impossible to achieve utopias, but it's because certain small number of humans start to sort of greedily attain power and money and control and influence as they become as they see the power in using this idea of a utopia for
It's
propaganda.
a bit like saying, why is my garden not perfect? It's because some evil weeds are overgrowing it, and they always do.
Yeah.
Right? But this is not how it works. A good garden is a system that is in balance and requires minimal interactions by the gardener. And
Joscha kennt sich wirklich aus, ne? Ich muss sagen, das ist wirklich immer erstaunlich, weil ihr dürft euch da keinen sozusagen falschen Vorstellungen machen. Der Typ grindet ja extrem in seinem Cognitive Science Deep Learning Shit, ne? Und trotzdem hat er diese Side-Facts auf Tasche, die wir uns ja hier auch immer aneignen, wenn wir uns irgendwie die Food Forest und den Agroforest und so reinziehen, ne? Das mit den Biotopen und den emergenten Feedback-Loops, die sozusagen sich selber balancen und so. Das, was ein Wald macht, ne? Der Wurm, er ist unser Freund, genau.
So you need to create a system that is designed to self-stabilize. And the design of social systems requires not just the implementation of the desired functionality, but the next level design, also in biological systems. You need to create a system that wants to converge to the intended function. Right? So instead of just creating an institution like the FDA that is performing a particular kind of role.
Ja, und das war halt, ne, das war sozusagen die Intention. Der Sozialismus sollte zum Kommunismus konvergieren. Das war das abgemachte Ziel, ne? Aber das konnte nicht passieren. Und meine Aussage ist ja im Wesentlichen, okay, das lag an den Machthierarchien, ne? Wir hatten einen Überwachungsstaat dann etabliert und es gab sozusagen Inkonsistenzen, die nicht mehr repariert werden konnten, weil das System inhärent dazu unfähig war, die eigenen Schwächen noch auszupolieren, weil es diese nicht gesehen hat, weil es sie nicht sehen wollte. Ne? Kritik am System wurde nicht mehr möglich gemacht. Wann GMM mit Joscha? Ja, das wäre das Geilste, ne? Ich habe ihm ja gesagt, dass ich das will, aber er hat keine Zeit. Und das ist so. Er nimmt sich keine Zeit für einen deutschen YouTuber mit 1000 Abos. Dafür ist seine Zeit zu kostbar. Wirklich. Wenn wir hier durch sind mit der Joscha Bach bei Lex Fridman Reihe, werden wir auf jeden Fall einen 2 Stunden Gespräch über das geile Meme sehen. Mit Joscha Bach. Auf Deutsch. Da freue ich mich schon drauf. Das wird großartig.
That is incentivized to do it optimally and then makes the performance that is actually enacted in every generation instrumental to that thing, that actual goal, right? And that is much harder to design and to achieve.
So you have to design a system where, I mean, listen, communism also was quote unquote incentivized to be a feedback loop system that achieves that utopia. It wasn't working given human nature. So the incentives were not correct given
so
human
how
nature.
do you incentivize people when they are getting coal off the ground to work as hard as possible? Because it's a terrible job and it's very bad for your health. And right, how do you do this? And you can give them prizes and medals and status to some degree, right? There's only so much status to give for that. And most people will not fall for this.
Yeah.
Right? Or you can pay them. And you probably have to pay them in an asymmetric way, because if you pay everybody the same and you nationalize the coal mines, eventually people will figure out that they can game the system.
Yes. So you're describing capitalism. So
capitalism is the present solution to the system. Yeah. And what we also noticed that I think that Marx was correct in saying that capitalism is prone to crisis. That capitalism is a system that in its dynamics is not convergent but divergent. It's not a stable system. And that eventually it produces an enormous potential for productivity, but it also is systematically misallocating resources. So a lot of people cannot participate in the production and consumption anymore. Right? And this is what we observe. We observe that the middle class in the US is tiny. It's a lot of people think that they're middle class, but if you are still flying economy, you're not middle class. Right? Every class is a magnitude smaller than the previous class. And right? The thing about classes is really like airline classes. There's the no-fly class. A lot of people are economy
have
class,
we really
business class, and very few are first class, and some are budget.
I mean, I understand. I think there's maybe some people. Probably I would push back against that definition of the middle class. It does feel like the middle class is pretty large, but yes, there's a discrepancy in terms of wealth.
Das viel, klar. Weil er einfach nicht im Ghetto rumhängt bei den Leuten, die wirklich arm sind, ne? Ich meine, er ist Professor am MIT.
So if
there's
you
a
think
big
about
wealth
in
gap.
terms of the productivity that our society could have, there is no reason for anybody to fly economy. Right? We would be able to let everybody travel in style.
Well, but also some people like to be frugal even when they're billionaires. Okay, so like let's take that into
Yes,
account.
but I mean, we probably don't need to be traveling lavish, but you also don't need to be tortured, right? There is a difference between frugal and subjecting yourself to torture.
Listen, I love economy. I don't understand why you're comparing flying economy to torture. I don't. Although the flight here, there was 2 crying babies next to me. So but that has nothing to do with economy. That has to do with crying babies. They're very cute though. So
yeah,
they kind of.
I have 2 kids, and sometimes I have to go back to visit the grandparents. And, and back means going from the West Coast to Germany, and that's a long flight.
Is it true that so when you're a father, you grow immune to the crying and all that kind of stuff? Like because like me, just not having kids, it can be other people's kids can be quite annoying when they're crying and screaming and all that kind of stuff.
When you have children and you are wired up in the default natural way, you're lucky in this regard, you fall in love with them.
Yeah.
And this falling in love with them means that you basically start to see the world through their eyes, and you understand that in a given situation they cannot do anything but being expressing despair. And so it becomes more differentiated. I noticed that, for instance, my son is typically acting on pure experience of what things are like right now. And he has to do this right now. And you have this small child that is, when he was a baby and so on, where he was just immediately expressing what he felt. And if you cannot regulate this from the outside, well, there's no point to be upset about it, right? It's like dealing with weather or something like this. You all have to get through it. And it's not easy for him either. But if you also have a daughter, maybe she is planning for that. Maybe she understands that, you know, that she's sitting in the car behind you and she's screaming at the top of her lungs and you're almost doing an accident.
Yeah.
And you really don't know what to do. What should I have done to make you stop screaming? You could have given me candy.
I think that's like a cat versus dog discussion. I love it. So, because you said like a fundamental aspect of that is love. That makes it all like worth it.
Also, wir haben ja, als unsere Tochter geboren wurde, genau eine Regel gehabt oder besser gesagt eine Metrik optimiert. Und zwar Stress zu minimieren. Alles andere war egal, nur kein Stress. Das hat insbesondere bedeutet, wir haben nicht unsere Eltern eingeladen, 2 Wochen nach der Geburt uns zu besuchen oder so ein Scheiß. Und wir haben niemanden reingelassen, damit der Haushalt aussehen kann wie Scheiße. Wir haben uns nur Gutscheine für Rossmann schenken lassen und sonst gar nichts. Und wenn Leute vorbeigekommen sind, sollten sie Essen mitbringen und so weiter und so fort. Ich habe mir Urlaub genommen am Anfang, sodass wir wirklich nur rumgepümmelt haben und Netflix gechillt haben auf dem Bett und gar nichts gemacht haben. Meine Tochter war in ihren ersten Lebensmonaten nie alleine, sondern sie hat immer gekuschelt mit uns. Und jetzt ist sie das resilienteste Kind, was ich kenne. Sie fährt mit mir übelst oft im Zug 2-3 Stunden und sie muckt mit nichts auf. Sie hat kein Smartphone. Wenn sie sich langweilt, dann erfindet sie sich Geschichten oder malt was. Ich hatte noch nie ein schreiendes Kind im Supermarkt und ich hatte auch noch nie irgendwie Stress mit ihr. Sie ist komplett entspanntes Kind. Und wie gesagt, sie wurde 2,5 Jahre gestillt. Das ist auch gesund und so, habe ich gehört. Und ja, also die Storys, die ich sozusagen von anderen Leuten kenne, die in meinem Alter sind, die halt auch Kinder haben, die divergieren komplett, die gehen in eine ganz andere Richtung. Und ich nehme an, das liegt daran, dass die andere Zielfunktionen optimiert haben. Gerade am Anfang. Je weiter am Anfang, desto kritischer. Das muss eigentlich klar sein. Ja, genau, Schwangerschaft auch stressfrei und so. Meine Frau hat angefangen zu meditieren. Mit dem Ziel, zur Geburt keine Schmerzmittel nehmen zu müssen. Und das hat auch funktioniert.
What in this monkey riding an elephant in a dream world, what role does love play in the human condition?
I think that love is the facilitator of non-transactional interaction. when you are observing your own purposes, some of these purposes go beyond your ego. They go beyond the particular organism that you are and your local interests.
That's what you mean by non-transactional.
Yes. So basically, when you are acting in a transactional way, it means that you are expecting something in return for you from the one that you're interacting with. Right? You are interacting with a random stranger. You buy something from them on eBay. You expect a fair value for the money that you sent them, and vice versa. Because you don't know that person, you don't have any kind of relationship to them. But when you know this person a little bit better and you know the situation that they're in, and you understand what they try to achieve in their life, and you approve because you realize that they're in some sense serving the same human sacredness as you are. And they need the thing that you have. Maybe you give it to them as a present.
But the feeling itself of joy is a kind of benefit, is a kind of transaction. Like,
yes, but the joy is not the point. The joy is the signal that you get. It's the reinforcement signal that your brain sends to you because you are acting on the incentives of the agent that you're part of. We are meant to be part of something larger.
Right.
That is the way in which we outcompeted other hominins.
Voll. Wir haben das mit der Kooperation deswegen gemacht, weil wir Belohnungssysteme im Kopf haben, die das tun. Wir werden belohnt für Kooperation. Deswegen entfremdet uns ja auch diese Wettbewerbsideologie so heftig. Und vor allem die ganzen Mannies im Patriarchat, die sich glorreiche Heldengeschichten über ihre Entfremdung erzählen. Jede $1 Million, die sie auf dem Konto haben und jeder Lambo, den sie irgendwo stehen haben und jede Porno-Bitch, die sie gefickt haben, völlig entfremdet, ist einfach nur ein Symptom für die Entfremdung. Klar.
Take that, Neanderthals.
Yeah, right. And also other humans. Right, there was a population bottleneck for human society that leads to an extreme lack of genetic diversity among humans. If you look at Bushmen in the Kalahari, that basically tribes that are not that far distant to each other have more genetic diversity than exists between Europeans and Chinese. And that's because basically the out of Africa population at some point had a bottleneck of just a few thousand individuals. And what probably happened is not that at any time the number of people shrunk below a few 100,000. What probably happened is that there was a small group that had a decisive mutation that produced an advantage. And this group multiplied and killed everybody else. And we are descendants of that group.
Yeah, I wonder what the peculiar characteristics of that group.
Yeah.
I mean, we can never know,
and a lot of people do. And
we can only just listen to the echoes in our, like the ripples that are still within us.
So I suspect what eventually made a big difference was the ability to organize at scale, to program each other.
With ideas.
That we became programmable, that we were willing to work in lockstep, that we went below, above the tribal level, that we no longer were groups of a few hundred individuals.
Genau, also dass wir irgendeine Form von Geschichte hatten, die so groß und so mächtig war, dass wir quasi mehrere Tribes orientieren konnten und die Mental States dieser Tribes synchronisieren konnten, ne? Denn wahrscheinlich ist es sonst so, dass man halt einfach auf diesem Level bleibt, ne? Die Tribes bleiben dann einfach auf ihrem Tribe-Level.
Individuals and acted on direct reputation systems, transactions.
Also jetzt zum Beispiel Christentum und so, ne?
Basically evolved an
Römisches
adaptation to become state building.
Sowas.
To form collectives outside of the direct collectives.
Yes, and that's basically a part of us became committed to serving something outside
bigger than
of
ourselves.
what we know.
Yeah, then that's kind of what love is.
And it's terrifying because it meant that we eradicated the others. And it's a force. Yeah. It's an adaptive force that gets us ahead in evolution, which means we displace something else that doesn't have that.
Oh, so we had to murder a lot of people that weren't about love. So love led to destruction.
They didn't have the same.
Ja, es war halt eine Outgroup und da ist es geklärt mit der Outgroup, ne? Outgroup-Dynamiken, furchtbar.
Strong love as we did. Right, that's why I mentioned this thing with fascism. When you see this, these speeches, do you want total war? And everybody says yes, right? This is this big oh my God, we are part of something that is more important than me, that gives meaning to my existence.
Fair enough.
But of course, it's not meaning, it's just bullshit.
Do you have advice for young people today in high school, in college, that are thinking about what to do with their career, with their life, so that at the end of the whole thing, they can be proud of what they did?
Don't cheat. Have integrity. Aim for integrity.
Integrity. So what does integrity look like when you're the river or the leaf or the fat frog in a lake?
Nicht vergessen, Joscha ist der auch gesagt hat, in diesem USA-Kapitalismus ist Cheaten der Default und wird natürlich belohnt, ist ja klar. Ne, das System setzt Incentives fürs Cheaten. Ist uns allen bekannt.
It basically means that you try to figure out what the thing is that is the most right. And this doesn't mean that you don't that you have to look for what other people tell you what's right, but you have to aim for moral autonomy. So things need to be right independently of what other people say.
Yeah.
I always felt that when people told me to listen to what others say, like read the room, build your ideas of what's true based on the high status people of your in-group, that does not protect me from fascism. The only way to protect yourself from fascism is to decide, is the world that is being built here the world that I want to be in?
Mhm.
And so in some sense, try to make your behavior sustainable. Act in such a way that you would feel comfortable on all sides of the transaction. Realize that everybody is you in a different timeline, but is seeing things differently and has reasons to do so.
Yeah.
Dieses has reasons to do so, ne? Das ist sozusagen das mit der bösen Absicht, ne? Ich sag ja auch, also das ist bei mir zum Beispiel auch so, ich versuche tatsächlich immer, und das ist was Intuitives, ich glaube, das habe ich schon als Kind gemacht, wenn ich mich selber dabei beobachte, sozusagen, jemand anderem, das zu unterstellen, ne? Die böse Absicht zu unterstellen, dann denke ich immer noch mal nach, wie zweckmäßig ist das jetzt, ne? Manchmal ist es einfach hilfreich, sozusagen toxische Leute loszuwerden und sich nicht weiter darüber Gedanken zu machen, aber im Hinterkopf wenigstens zu haben, okay, es gibt trotzdem Gründe dafür, dass die Leute so sind, wie sie sind, ne? Ich habe ja in meinem Video das Dogma des freien Willens überwinden oder so, habe ich das auch angesprochen, ne? Dass wir ein komplett anderes Justizsystem haben könnten, wenn wir diesen Schwachsinn mit dem freien Willen und der bösen Absicht mal nicht immer ständig unterstellen würden per Default. Weil das ist garantiert in den seltensten Fällen der Fall. Ja, ich sage ja nicht, dass es das überhaupt nicht gibt, aber es ist eher ein Modell, was energieeffizient arbeitet, sagen wir mal, und ein Minimierungsproblem für einen selber löst, sich sozusagen das Verhalten von anderen Leuten zu erklären. Und das muss nichts mit der Realität zu tun haben. Es muss nur kohärent genug sein, damit wir in Ruhe schlafen können.
There's I've come to realize this recently. There is an inner voice that tells you what's right and wrong. And speaking of reading the room, there's times what integrity looks like is there's times when a lot of people are doing something wrong. And what integrity looks like is not going on Twitter and tweeting about it, but not participating quietly, not doing. So it's not like signaling or not all this kind of stuff, but actually living what you think is right. Like living it, not
There's
signaling.
also sometimes this expectation that others are like us. So imagine the possibility that some of the people around you are space aliens that only look human. Right, so they don't have the same prayers as you do. They don't have the same impulses. That's what's right and wrong. There is a large diversity in these basic impulses that people can have in a given situation. And now realize that you are a space alien, right? You are not actually human. You think that you're human, but you don't know what it means, like what it's like to be human. You just make it up as you go along, like everybody else. And you have to figure that out. What it means that you are a full human being, what it means to be human in the world, and how to connect with others on that. And there is also something, don't be afraid in the sense that you, if you do this, you're not good enough. Because if you are acting on these incentives of integrity, you become trustworthy. That's the way in which you can recognize each other. There is a particular place where you can meet, and you can figure out what that place is, where you will give support to people because you realize that they act with integrity and they will also do that.
Mhm.
So in some sense, you are safe if you do that. You're not always protected. There are people which will abuse you, and that are bad actors in a way that it's hard to imagine before you meet them. But there is also people which will try to protect you.
Yeah, that's such a thank you for saying that. That's such a hopeful message that no matter what happens to you, there'll be a place. There's people you'll meet that also have what you have, and you will find happiness there and safety there.
Yeah, but it doesn't need to end well. It can also all go wrong. So there's no guarantees in this life. So you can do everything right, and you still can fail, and you can still horrible things happen to you that traumatize you and mutilate you, and you have to be grateful if it doesn't happen.
And ultimately be grateful
Mann
no
ist ein
matter what
Poet.
happens. Because even just being alive is pretty damn nice.
Yeah, even that, the gratefulness in some sense is also just generated by your brain to keep you going. It's all the trick.
Speaking of which, Camus said, I see many people die because they judge that life is not worth living. I see others, paradoxically, getting killed for the ideas or illusions that give them a reason for living. What is called the reason for living is also an excellent reason for dying. I therefore conclude that the meaning of life is the most urgent of questions. So I have to ask, what, Joscha Bach, is the meaning of life? It is an urgent question, according to Camus.
I don't think that there's a single answer to this. Nothing makes sense unless the mind makes it so. So you basically have to project a purpose. And if you zoom out far enough, there's the heat death of the universe, and everything is meaningless. Everything is just a blip in between. And the question is, do you find meaning in this blip in between? Do you find meaning in observing squirrels? Do you find meaning in raising children and projecting a multi-generational organism into the future? Do you find meaning in projecting an aesthetic of the world that you like into the future and trying to serve that aesthetic? And if you do, then life has that meaning. And if you don't, then it doesn't.
I kind of enjoy the idea that you just create the most vibrant, the most weird, the most unique kind of blip you can, given your environment, given your set of skills. Just be the most weird set of like local pocket of complexity you can be. So that like when people study the universe, they'll pause and be like, that's weird.
It looks like a useful strategy, but of course it's still motivated reasoning. You're obviously acting on your incentives here.
It's still a story we tell ourselves within a dream that's hardly in touch with reality.
It's definitely a good strategy if you are a podcaster.
And a human, which I'm still trying to figure out if I am.
Yeah, there's a mutual relationship somehow.
Josh, you're one of the most incredible people I know. I really love talking to you. I love talking to you again, and it's really an honor that you spend your valuable time with me. I hope we get to talk many times throughout our short and meaningless lives.
Or meaningful.
Thank
you, Lex. I enjoyed this conversation very much.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Joscha Bach, and thank you to Coinbase, Code.
So, die Frage, die sich mir jetzt stellt, ist, ich denke, also, es gibt ja jetzt noch den dritten Talk, ne? Den knallen wir uns auch irgendwann rein, aber wahrscheinlich nicht mehr heute, ne? Und den jetzt anzufangen, ist auch irgendwie müßig. Ich guck mal nochmal schnell in meiner schlauen Liste, ob wir noch irgendwas haben, was kurz ist. Wenn nicht, dann reden wir irgendwen. Ich habe ja schon gesagt, ich habe vorm Stream noch ein Video aufgenommen, das werde ich dann noch rendern und dann kommt das morgen. Ja, alles, was Joscha Bach sagt, hat mehr oder weniger poetischen Charakter. Das ist ja das Geile. Ich finde, es ist eine extreme Poesie. Es liegt eine Poesie da drin, wenn jemand es schafft, Dinge präzise auszudrücken. Und ich bin aufgewachsen in einer Welt, in der Poesie und Kunst und Lyrik und so immer das genaue Gegenteil war. Extrem schwammig und fuzzy und unkonkret. Und alle Erwachsenen um mich herum haben so getan, als wäre das große Kunst. Und ich war abgestoßen davon. Es hat mich angewidert. Es war furchtbar für mich. Und ich komme erst langsam dazu, jetzt zum Beispiel mir Lyrics von Musik und Texten so reinzuziehen und da irgendwas zu finden, was ich daran gut finden kann. Ich wurde sozusagen durch Virtue Signaling oder so komplett entfremdet erstmal davon als Kind. Und als Jugendlicher hatte ich einen kompletten Hass auf Sprachen. Ja, und Goethe, Alter, verpiss dich, Junge. Der Wichser, wirklich. Auf den habe ich immer noch einen Hass. So. Ja, ich denke, wir reden einfach irgendwen. Wir reden zu Smash. So, Leute.